I tried to wake up at like before 8 and then kind of accidentally fell back asleep until not too long ago. So a little bit out of it. Anyways, hi. I'm Atti, and this is my library haul for this week. I got these books last Saturday. This was a good one. Got a lot that I liked, not a lot that I didn't like this time. So let's just get into it. And I apologize in advance if I'm a little bit, that's kind of where I'm at today. Okay, so this is the only one. This is the only one that I really didn't like. I'm starting with the ones I don't like and going steadily up as I like them more and more. This is the only one I really didn't like. I put little sticky notes on them this time to like help remind me. I don't want to read them right off the bat, but maybe I'll read the sticky notes after I'm done with each book to see if I missed anything, I guess. So this is a book about a child sitting on an island and looking at the world and wondering why it's so messed up, and then in the end the child decides to be born. Ooh, it was looking out on the world before being born. The problem with this book is that it comes across as like super preachy, but the text is pretty simplistic, so it's a little bit weird of me to say this, but personally it comes across as being not just preachy, which is annoying in and of itself, but also preachy in a really like privileged way, because it's got that kind of like John Lennon Imagine vibe, where like it's like world peace could be so easy if everybody can just like sit down and like look how easy it is to just sit down and look at the sky, and if we all just did that, we could all get along, you know what I mean? And like that just strikes me as like, okay, I guess easy enough for you to say, but like that doesn't feel grounded, that doesn't feel real, and if it doesn't feel grounded and real, then it's really unproductive. I'll read you some lines. Okay, so the other thing about this is that it's like a weird criticism to give a kid's book, I know, but it's very much like, oh, everything's so terrible, and then like we should fix it, and then the book is kind of structured like it's coming up with ideas for how to fix things, but they're like, because it's a fantastical kids book, they're totally surreal and pointless, and so it comes across as like genuinely complaining about like the like real hardships in the real world, and then falling back on like these like pointless, meaningless, like, oh, I'm just a kid's book, I'm gonna come up with fantasy solutions for that. And I just don't like that juxtaposition, between like the like sounds like the author really is decrying the state of the world, but then like still falls back on just being a kid's book about it. Like this. The child saw famine. What if we lasso the clouds and bring rain to the desert? What if we dig rivers of water and milk? What? That's not going to help. And like, whatever, it's a kid's book, but like, is that annoying? It's annoying to me. There's a lot more of this. The child saw the powerful gorging, ordering, shouting, and decreeing, and he said to himself, we have to open their eyes or drive them out. Easy enough for you to say, I guess. The child looked out at the ocean and thought, what if we wash it clean? Then he sat in front of it, just dreaming. Child saw tears. We have to hug, he decided, and not be afraid of kisses. Like, don't tell me what to do if you're going to be this unconstructive about it. This is extremely unconstructive feedback for actual, real, big problems that do carry weight to some of your readers. And I feel like the author of this story either isn't actually directly feeling the effects of these world problems, is just looking out at other people suffering, and from the safety of that perch is able to be like, like, what if we did all of these meaningless, pointless fantasy things to solve these problems, because it doesn't actually affect you. Like, it doesn't feel respectful of the actual gravity of this to some potential readers. This is possibly even my least favorite. The child lowered his head. He saw the moon with a flag stuck right in its face. How dumb, he thought, to try to own the moon. What if we set it free and say we're sorry? Okay, let alone the super annoying saccharinity of that. Also, like, that you're going to put that on these issues, like, somebody putting a flag on the moon is not is not in any way equivalent to freaking famine. Like the fact that that's kind of like proposed as one of these things, like, you know, like ocean pollution and famine, and then like there's a flag on the moon. Who freaking cares? Like, have a sense of scale, you know? Have a sense of. I'm a little bit out of it today, but good lord, I hate that book. Is there anything that I missed here? It isn't hard to imagine a better world. Like, it's harder than you think. It actually is complicated. And take it seriously, please. Privileged preachiness is the worst. Okay, this is on my didn't like it too much list. And it's by the author. It's called Oh So Tiny Bunny. Oh yeah, I didn't say because I didn't care. This one's called What If by Thierry Linane and Olivier Talic. This one is called Oh So Tiny Bunny, and it's by David Kirk, who wrote Miss Spider's Tea Party, which is a book that I own and love. And I got it just because of that. The cover kind of creeps me out, and you know, but David Kirk's drawings always do kind of creep me out. But there can be enough character sometimes to save it. In this case, like, I don't know, there's some okay stuff that's like sort of what I expect from David Kirk, where it's like colorful and surreal. Most of the story takes place in dreams. It's about a small rabbit dreaming that he's larger. It just didn't do very much for me, and honestly, there were some moments where the illustrations kind of terrified me. Like, that is scary to me. So yeah, it's a really basic story, and I just was hoping it would have more of the, like, Miss Spider's Tea Party, or the Miss Spider books in general, kind of have a really kind of like an action story kind of vibe to me. This one not so much. Tokyo Digs a Garden. My only note for this says creepy cat. This is another one on my I didn't like it so much list. The cat is really creepy. So there's this cat, and some pictures make it look like more or less a normal cat, but other pictures really don't. It starts to stand up, and when it stands up, it gets really creepy. Look at how creepy that freaking cat is. It's very rarely. It's not addressed. It's not like a part of the story that it's a creepy bipedal cat. It's just it just is. So this is a story about a young boy whose grandfather, who lives in a big city, and his grandfather remembers when it wasn't a big city and it was all naturey, and then the boy is given these magical seeds that he plants, and then they become a growth that overtakes the city again. And this book, my problem with it is it feels really hipstery. I just didn't like how, like, I didn't like the illustration style. I don't feel like there's enough character if you are going to give the characters that little face. Like the small boy character literally only has glasses, and that's not enough character for me. It makes I feel like it's an attempt at making the art look stylishly simplistic, but to me it just makes it devoid of personality and sort of just flat. Let's see if I can find any others. And you know, like, this is nitpicky of me and definitely super subjective, but I just really don't like the colors here. Like, that's a lot of colors that don't really vibe with me. They're not if you're gonna be that colorful, I feel like it should be a little bit brighter. Like, they're all really low contrast and murky colors, which I don't know, maybe it's some people's thing, not mine. And yeah, the story is like really predictable. It's exactly what you would think from my description. It's very straightforward, and the way that they talk about it, it's, you know, this is weird to me, but it's really, there's this like moment of dialogue where they're talking about like how the world is overgrown now and what are we going to do about it? Well, we're just going to get used to it, but they don't use any contractions. Tokyo thought for a moment. Kevin's tail twitched. A pack of monkeys swooped from branch to branch in the canopy above. I think, said Tokyo, that we will just have to get used to it. Grandfather watched a flock of cranes flying across the small piece of sky peeking out between the trees. He remembered how, as a young boy, he would watch them flying overhead before winter settled in. I think maybe you are right. Something about the way they didn't use contractions there makes it feel very like... The whole book feels like stiff and personality-less to me. It's like It's like a postage stamp made into a book. Okay, anyways, that's Tokyo Digs a Garden by either John Eric or Yon Eric, I'm not sure. John Eric Lapano and Kellen Hatanaka. This one, I can't remember if I actually ranked this as like the best of my negative reviews or the worst of my neutral reviews. This is Garden Jungle by Hélène Drouvert, I think is how you pronounce that. What do you think? Hélène Drouvert? Elena Drouvert, maybe? Not sure. This book suffers from something that is a pet peeve of mine, that it's a book that has like a lesson to it. So I just don't like that. I don't think the kids' books should have lessons. I don't think that unless it's an Aesop's fable, it doesn't need a moral at the end. So the moral is the kid is bored at the beginning of the story and then he learns not to be. So he's like, I'm bored, Tom complains. I have nothing to do. His mother says, poor Tom, I'm sure that's not true. Why not take a look at what's outside your door? You'll find lots of things that you've not seen before. And then in the end, he says, I'm sure that's the best place I've ever explored. I can't wait to go there the next time I'm bored. Everything that happens in between feels really inconsequential. So it was really... It feels like story-wise it was just made to deliver that sort of, ironically boring moral. However, the story seems also to exist just for the excuse of having the main draw of the book, which is, so this art style, very simplistic, but the reason that it's all silhouette-y like that is because the whole middle section of the book, once the boy starts exploring the tall grass outside his house, are these incredible paper cuts. And I am not going to lie, the paper cuts are really cool. It's so cool to see something this original in any kind of book. I feel like I must be one of the first people to have ever checked this out from my library, because this would certainly not last more than a couple of hours in my classroom. I can tell you. But yeah, look at how gorgeous this is. All the different types of trees and all the layers of plants. The animals, this one's one of my favorites. The zebra is purely made from cut out, so that's cool. Yeah, so that's really cool, but the text is sort of inconsequential. He glimpses a butterfly high in a tree. When he climbs up there, it's gone, floating free. Tom hears the rustle of leaves in the breeze and watches the flight of a bird through the trees. Did he just write trees two thing in a row? Yeah, he did. Butterfly's gone, there are trees all around, the garden's a jungle and quivers with sound. The story is kind of like just describing the paper cuts and then the framing device of like, kid is bored and learns that you should never be bored. Whatever, like, don't put lessons in books. It could have just been a wordless paper cut book and it would have been better. Okay, this is definitely, we're in my neutrals category now. This is Idea Jar by Adam, wow. How am I going to do that one? Adam Lehrhaupt, I guess, and Deb Piluti. This book is fine. There's nothing wrong with this book. It's just not my thing. The art style is not my thing. This is the kind of art style it is. It just doesn't appeal to me at all. This book gives me really strong Dragons Love Tacos vibes. I know that pretty much every kid that I've met who's read Dragons Love Tacos loves Dragons Love Tacos. I hate Dragons Love Tacos. I don't know how that became one of the breakout stars of kids' books in the past few years. It mystifies me. I think it's boring and not that funny. Not as funny as everybody seems to think it is. And kind of ugly to boot. Sorry, Dragons Love Tacos. That's how I feel. This one isn't as bad as Dragons Love Tacos, but it just reminded me of that. And so it's about a classroom that has a jar full of ideas for stories, and then the stories it talks about storytelling and like how you can mix different ideas to make stories, and like it's all fine, and then the stories break out of the jar and become super chaotic, and it kind of like goes back and forth between like, actually talking about like real things about telling stories, and then like going into this surreal kind of, I don't know, metaphor about the stories actually being like real characters actually coming out of a jar. It's a little bit mixed up, but I don't think that's a bad thing for a kid's book. But yeah, not it's really just like you can put ideas in a jar, then the ideas come out of the jar, then they go back in the jar, and it has some ideas about how to tell a story, but they're extremely simplistic, so boring to me. Okay. Explosion at the Poetry Factory by Kyle Lukoff and Mark Hoffman. I'm going to start by reading the very back of this because this is another one of those books that has a little story behind it that I thought was interesting. This is author's note. This book would not exist without the Philalexian Society of Columbia University, one of the best parts of my college years. Philo is a debate team and literary society with a long and illustrious history, and one of our most popular events is the Alfred Joyce Kilmer Memorial Bad Poetry Contest. Kilmer was a poet and member of Philo way back in 1908. He is most famous for a poem called Trees, you might have heard of it, or a poem trying to sound like it. The first two lines are, I think that I should never see a poem lovely as a tree. He thought it was a good poem, but he also thought it was fun to write bad poems on purpose. Kilmer published some of these bad poems using the name Alfred Watts. Every year, Philos gather to honor Kilmer and read our own intentionally bad poems. In 2007, my friend Amitai Schmanz-Schleier read something called Explosion at the Poem Factory and won first place. Almost 10 years later, I got the idea to turn that bad poem into a fun book. What you've just read is very different from Mr. Schleier's original poem, but I thank and commend him for letting me use the title, some selected lines, and the inspiration. Surkam. I don't know what that last word is, and I may have mispronounced it. Anyways, okay, so this book is about a guy who is a piano teacher that gets put out of business when they make automatic pianos, and so he goes to work in a poetry factory because in this world, they no longer make poems by hand anymore. They have an automated production of poems in a factory, and he works there for a while, and then danger happens, and the factory breaks down, and then he has to get back to making poetry by hand after that, and teach the world how to do that. Okay, so the thing about this book is it's two things. One, it's a vehicle for intense amounts of puns. So maybe younger Atti would have liked it a little bit more because I'm still into puns, but I was like more into the idea of like reading a book that was just puns and nothing else back then. As an adult, I'm not that into it. It's like, okay, yeah, I get it. Can you actually also tell a story though? You know what I mean? The other thing that it is a through the puns, it's a vocabulary teaching tool, a vocabulary about poetry, and I think that's the better aspect of the book, and I think I almost would have wanted it to just be that, because my favorite part of the book is this at the very end, is a glossary, and it's kind of one of the most interesting glossaries I've ever seen because it doesn't stick with the same format for the glossary all the way through. It switches things up constantly. It's fully illustrated, and it's really lively. So this is an introduction to the concept of feet in poetry, and then like a list of all of the terms to do with feet, and then it goes types of poems, and it's like fully illustrated types of poems with example poems, and like look how like jaunty and illustrated and interesting and dynamic this is for a glossary. This was the only part of the book that I actually really enjoyed reading, so that's interesting to me. The rest of it is just it's really not even worth showing you, because it's nothing but puns using words about poetry, just pun after pun after pun, and the story really seems constructed around making those puns. I think that there's in a normal book, there would be about 3 or 4 pages that would have been cut from this because they were sort of redundant, like they were just describing the same thing over and over again, but they put them in here because they had to have those scenes in order to, carry more puns. They had puns and they needed somewhere to put them, so they made extra pages and dragged out the story a bit redundantly, I think, in order to include them. In some cases, not in all cases. It's not like badly written. It's just a little bit... it's got a very specific focus. The one gripe that I would have with the glossary is, and this is mostly subjective, So they have example poems to demonstrate these poetic terms, and the poems are all written by the author, and that's fine. Like, why wouldn't it be? It's the book is written by the author, but at the same time, I think it'd be really cool if they had used like actual like famous poetry and taught a little bit of poetry history along with this. And the one point where I really feel about that's true is the section on haiku. One thing in here, it says, I thought this was interesting. So it has these different definitions of different types of feet, and one of them is I don't know how to pronounce it, molossus. And it says, a 3-syllable foot where all 3 syllables are stressed. I'm not sure if these actually exist. It's the only one that he doesn't give an example for, and he says that it doesn't actually exist. I feel like they must exist. Did he not do research? I feel like a 3-syllable foot where all 3 syllables are stressed. Like wouldn't like watch your step count? Like, I feel like it's not that hard to like think of them. So I'm surprised that it feels like it wasn't actually researched. That surprised me. So this one is called If Apples Had Teeth. It's by Milton and Shirley Glazer. Milton Glazer, the designer who did the I Heart New York logo. This book is freaking weird. In my notes, I said sort of feels like they didn't want to write it. Where did this come from? I'd be interested to know. Of course, they probably did want to write it. I just don't know, and therefore want to know like what the origin of this book was, because it feels. I can't explain this. It's really subjective, but it feels like the authors are just kind of like, I don't know, just put this in the book, you know? If snakes were salted, they would be pretzels. If watermelons had feathers, they would be cushions. It's probably just like they thought it was fun to be surreal, and that's completely valid. I'm usually pretty into that too. For some reason, this one felt sort of dismissive about its surrealness, just sort of like, oh, you know, surreal stuff, whatever. And there's a few moments that I like, I guess, but I'm really there's a weird there's a weird thing about this book, which is that the rhyming is incredibly inconsistent, which is fine. I'm not complaining, but I thought it was really surprising. And I'll get to why, but first an example. So there's some lines that rhyme like this. If turtles were chickens, they would run like the Dickens. Okay. If pickles were tickled, they would never be sour. So pickled and tickled, I mean, that rhymes. You know, the second half doesn't. It still works, but it's like a different rhyme structure than this. And then if polka dots were white and buttered, they would be popcorn. I mean, that not only doesn't rhyme, it's not even in meter. Like, if horses had hat racks, they would be reindeer. So it just kind of like goes off the rails from the rhyme completely, which would be totally fine. But then the thing that throws me off is that there's some lines that feel like they kind of feel forced just to make a rhyme. Specifically this one: if a grizzly bear was caught unaware, he would polish his nails and comb his hair. If he was caught unaware, he would comb his hair. Like, if you actually like think about that outside of the rhyme, what does that mean? Like, what? Caught unaware doing what? Why would being caught unaware cause you to comb your hair? The only answer I can think of is because it rhymes. But why would you like make these sentences that don't make sense just so that they rhyme if you have no commitment to actually making a rhyme? Like, they could have just had it not rhyme and give it a sentence that make more sense. The other few things I have about this book is that there's the art is very cute and vintage and stylish, and it's nice. There's a few moments where it gets really freaking creepy, which is like not a bad thing, almost maybe plus, but they do creep me out, so I wanted to show you this one of a crab, which has a crab's normal eyes down here, but then also puts this extremely disturbing face on the back of the crab. So it's a two-faced crab, and one of its faces is nightmare fuel. And then the other one, if zebra wore striped pajamas, you would never know. There's something about the abrupt rhymeless ending of that line combined with that picture that really freaks me out. If zebra wore striped pajamas, you would never know. You know, that freaks me out. So, anyways, I guess that's my review. I don't love it, and I feel like I should if it's a surreal kids book, because usually I love those. This one feels very like just like thought up in an afternoon, inconsistent and thrown out. Like it didn't feel. It didn't. I didn't get the feeling that it was cared for by the author. But who's to say? You know, who's to say? Certainly not me. I don't know if this is my last neutral or my first positive, but it's probably my last neutral. It's definitely the cusp book. So it's called Nova the Star Eater by Lindsay Leslie, illustrated by John Tae-soo Kim. Oh, sorry, I thought that was a D. It's Tae-soo Kim. John Tae-soo Kim. That's the handwritten font threw me off. Okay, so this is a book that is an educational book, but it doesn't really get on my bad side about that, because first of all, the education aspect is scientific, not a moral. I think it's specifically like moral lessons that bother me. But also it really does a pretty good job of keeping the like, you know, like this is actually a book to teach you science thing, like really under the radar for most of the book, and then it just has this nice glossary and like scientific explanation in the back of the book, which I think is a good structure. It keeps the story very storyish. In fact, it keeps the story surprisingly storyish. I was really expecting the authors to be looking at like actual scientific phenomenon in space, and then like finding a way to translate them into a story. And so I was a little bit afraid that the story was going to be a little bit stilted because of that, because it would just be based on like basically like translating science into story methodically. But it's not that at all. It's about this thing that's not a nova. Its name is Nova, and it's a star eater, and it eats stars, and then it eats Earth. And then it talks about the importance of the sun, but it also doesn't have has a very childlike interpretation of what would happen if the sun disappeared, right? Like it's just dark, but everybody's fine, and they like go out into space to talk to Nova to try and fix the problem. And yeah, in the process, they do talk about like what the sun does for Earth, which is part of the scientific explanation. But it does so within a fantastical concept where it's not really demonstrating what would actually happen if the sun disappeared. It just gives you the rough idea of the sorts of things that the sun does do for us. Kind of has a fairy tale logic to it. Still, it sets up its own little universe with its own internal logic, and it's extremely playful, and it's not like married to being super scientific about everything while also communicating some truths about scientific stuff. And so I thought it was a good balance.
Just cutting in from the future to say that I forgot to say something about this book that I liked, which is that this book has a few good examples of when a picture book really utilizes the fact that it's a picture book, using pictures almost as their text and tying the text and pictures together. For example, one day she spots a juicy yellow dwarf near a pretty bluish-greenish planet, a planet wrapped in swirls like comet tails. Nova sets her sights, opens wide, and gulp. It doesn't actually say what happens, it shows you what happens, right? And then another example is here. The room explodes with nervous chatter and debate. Excuse me, may I have your attention, please? It never has to say who's saying it. It just puts the text next to the picture of the girl saying it, and utilizes the fact that the book has pictures to tell the story with an actual combination of stories and pictures. Too many children's books are just pictures and stories, kind of side by side, complementing each other but not fully integrating. And I like it when it integrates like that. So that's all I want to say.
But at the end of the day, it was kind of flat to me, not particularly entertaining, not particularly engaging. I didn't really love the art too much. I feel like they tried a little bit too hard to make this kid cute, and so it was just kind of like there was a few moments where it made me smile, but it didn't make me laugh, which I think it should have, given how ridiculous the story is. That's all I need to say about that, I guess. Okay, getting into my positives. This one's called What There Is Before There Is Anything There, a scary story by, what's his name? Their name? Her name? Liniers? Liniers? I'm not sure. So the great thing about this is that it is a scary story for kids. To me, the reason that it's the lowest on my positives list is because the genuine awesomeness of a spooky kid story that actually I think does succeed in being spooky, and I just want more books like that, is undercut by the illustrations. So the story, the words itself, which I'll read to you now, are very super vague and mysterious. The pictures define them, and I think that that some of these mysterious words being defined does take away some of their spookiness. It's the same every night. From the door, his father says good night. From the door, his mother says sweet dreams, and they turn out the light. Then something incredible happens. Where there was a ceiling, now there is nothing. He could see the ceiling with his very own eyes. Now there's only a black hole, black and infinite. He knows that they are coming. They come every night when the ceiling disappears. First comes one. It's not always the same one. It floats down from where the ceiling was, slowly. It stands on the end of the bed without making a single sound. It stares at him. It doesn't stop staring. It never says anything. And then more come down. Lots more. They don't say anything. They just stare at him. He starts to feel scared because he knows what is coming next. Wouldn't that be cool if it were just more vague, abstract, something you can't quite tell in the darkness? Maybe they could have done a wash of black with subtle different colors of black in there so that you kind of feel like you can see something but you can't actually see it. Instead, this is what the things look like, which, setting aside that I don't particularly like the art style, it's also just extremely specific, and it doesn't look like the room is dark at all, so, and then the rest of them come and they all kind of have that vibe to them. I think it could have been cooler if they'd been more vague with the illustrations, but I appreciate a scary kids book. Okay. Okay, this is a story that I didn't really enjoy very much, but it was more impactful once I reached the end, which I guess I'll tell you why, but I'll get to this first. The biggest plus I can say about this book is that the art isn't totally my thing, but the colors in the art are. I think the colors are absolutely gorgeous in this book. So let's find some of my favorites. Gorgeous colors. The illustrations are very it's paint over visible pencil sketch lines, and so it's a little bit formless for my personal taste. It's not that it's too formless, it's kind of the wrong balance for me between formless and not formless. So it kind of feels a little bit more like a sketch than I would want, but who cares, because the color is so nice. Look at this subtle end of the day lighting, so cool. And what else? I mean, dang, right? And then so it's a story about family selling fruit in Afghanistan. And it's just kind of boring. It's just got a very serious tone. It's not a very active story. It's not it's not really trying to be an entertaining story, which is fine, but it also isn't a really atmospheric story. It's very straightforward and this is what's happening, while also not being there's just not a lot of personality in the writing. They arrive in town. Excited voices are everywhere. There is a sheep market. A man selling roasted beans shouts loudly. Yamo can smell shish kebab roasting and bread baking. There are also the smells of carpets and books. The town is so lively that Yamo's heart beats faster. Yamo's father finally decides to open his stand in the large plaza where people go back and forth. I'm going to sell the plums here in this plaza. Why don't you walk around town and try to sell the cherries? It's just very, very straightforward. To me, that's not my kind of writing. Um, so I was bored throughout the book until the very last line. They do, they talk about the town and all these different seasons. They talk about the life of the people in this town. They talk about how beautiful this town is. Oh, I didn't say what the title was. This is The Most Beautiful Village in the World by Yutaka Kobayashi. And yeah, so it's just this life in a little Afghanistan village. And then this is I'm going to read you the last page. Sorry about spoilers if you care about those for a picture book, which you probably don't, so I'm just going to go for it. Yamo asks his father if he can give the lamb a name. He calls it Bahar. The name means spring. Please come home quick, Brother Haroon. We have a new member of the family. Spring is still nearly a year away. In the winter, the village was destroyed in the war. It no longer exists. Damn! Just really got this like, oh shit kind of ending. And, after a boring book, despite the fact that most of the book isn't enjoyable, that really does put a lot of impact in it because it really drives home like it's so shocking and brutal that it kind of makes you feel like for a fleeting in a sort of safe way for a fleeting moment some of the horror of war, because it really throws you for a loop. It reminds me of the end of A Girl Worth Fighting For in the animated Mulan. And then it's got this story of like why the author wrote this book, where the author actually has visited Afghanistan and talks about how it's much more beautiful and full of nature than a lot of people think it is, and he visited a village and the people were cheerful and lived their lives passionately, and they welcomed a traveler like me with generosity. And then the village that he visited was destroyed in the war, and he doesn't know whatever happened to all the friends that he made there. So it's a powerful story by the end of it, but it's also kind of boring until the end of it. So there's that. Okay. Next one is that really the next one? Oh yeah, I guess it is. This one's called Henry's Freedom Box. A true story from the Underground Railroad. So this is about what's his name? Henry Box Brown. It says one of the most famous runaway slaves on the Underground Railroad, the man who mailed himself to freedom. So before I get into this story, I do want to mention that this is Henry's Freedom Box by Ellen Levine, and Kadir Nelson. It is written by a white woman, which doesn't necessarily have to have that much impact on the book, but I'd argue that maybe it does. But I'll get to that, I guess. It's a good book. I like it. I think the thing that's great about it, so it starts out, it shows this kid's whole life, like from this all the way until he's an adult and mails himself to Pennsylvania in a wooden box. And throughout it does a really good job. How do I put this? Like, okay, there's a lot of terrifying things about slavery, obviously, and I think it's really easy to think of like what's terrifying about slavery and have images of, like people doing backbreaking work and people being whipped, and yes, obviously those are terrifying, and but because it's so easy to think of those examples of why slavery is terrifying, I do think that a lot of media tends to go straight to that, in my experience, instead of or a lot of the media that I've been exposed to anyways. It tends to go straight to that and not get into as much like some of the less commonly thought of horrors. I mean, and okay, granted, a lot of media does get into these less thought of horrors, but not enough that I've seen it like everywhere in the way that I've seen, some of the more like bluntly horrific imagery, right? But even if it's not bluntly horrific, this stuff that happens in this book is horrific, and I really appreciate it being showcased like this, especially to children. So things like how like the slave master is dying, and the boy thinks for a moment that he might be released as a result, but then he's not. He's given to the slave master's son and therefore separated from his family. Terrifying. And then and then he meets a girl and they fall in love and they have kids, and then his wife and kids are sold to someone else while he's at work, and he never sees them again or even gets to say goodbye. Horrifying. Like, there's all sorts of terrifying stuff, and you know, like, and also just like there's a scene where he, in order to, you know, successfully do his plan to mail himself, he has to get out of work, and so he, like, you know, badly injures himself in order to get out of work, and the sort of, you know, the obvious implication of, like, you know, the desperation of the things somebody will do just for the just because of how valuable the end goal is of freedom. You know, I think it really does a good job of like it doesn't just like slap the horror in your face. It drags you down into it, and to me that's almost scarier. If you ever encounter one of those assholes who says that that like, oh, but there was some slaves that liked being slaves, like, those people, and tell them to read this book, because the thing is that even if somehow, like, you know, you had a relatively easier life as a slave, the fact that stuff like is in this book was happening around you to people like you would still stress you the hell out. And if this book doesn't illustrate that and give you empathy for how it doesn't matter which slave you were, your life freaking sucked as a slave, then I don't know what does. So there's some good white people in this story. There's this guy who, it says, Dr. Smith was a white man who thought slavery was wrong, and helps him mail himself. And then in the end, he gets to where he's going, and he gets taken out of the box, and there's like one black guy and 3 white guys there. I'm not calling that unrealistic, right? But I feel that the story, I just would like to point out that the story does not address in any way the you know, racism of these good white people. The, you know, it kind of, by not saying anything about them, it sort of implies that that, like, you know, back in those days there was bad white people who, like, wanted to torture humans, and then good white people who were just, you know, not bad, which obviously isn't the case. You know, I'm not saying, like, well, no, I guess I am. You know, like, these white people were racist too, based on everything that I understand about this, and they don't say that that's not true, but by not saying anything about it, they kind of lead the reader, especially a kid reader, to, you know, be like, oh, he got to Philadelphia, and he's okay now because he's not in the bad part of the country where they have slaves. Like, no, like, life was still going to be hard, right? It just feels to me like something was disincluded from the story in order to, like, be like, it's okay, not all white people are bad, to the white people reading this, which is unnecessary, and I do wonder if that is a sort of unintentional side effect of the book being written by a white person. Anyways, that aside, that doesn't really bring down the book very much at all, because it does do a really good job on focusing on the experience of the protagonist, and how totally horrific in a variety of different ways that it manages to showcase this situation is, and as a true story. And so I thought it was powerful. I like that. Okay, this one is called Open This Little Book, by Jesse Klausmeier and illustrated by Susie Lee. So this is one of those books that doesn't really have a story, and so normally it would be ranked pretty low on my list, honestly, but it does have a gimmick, and in this particular case, the gimmick is so appealing to me that I ranked it actually pretty high. So the deal with this is that it tells you to open this little book that's inside the book, and then it says open this little red book, and it's just a series of books that are all inside of each other. And read about Ladybug, who opens a little green book, and reads about Frog, who opens a little orange book, and reads about Rabbit, who opens a little yellow book. And the story itself is very simplistic and somewhat surreal. It gets into a space where there's a giant who's too big to open the little book, but like, look how cool this is, and it was surprised to me that I got like 2 like interesting creative paper cut sort of books, totally by coincidence. But look at how cool that is. All these little books inside of each other. There's nothing more to say about it than that. The story is not worth saying anything about. It's really just there to have an excuse, I feel, to carry this concept. It doesn't really do much beyond that. But what a cute concept. Okay, The Luckiest Snowball. Okay, I'm gonna be a little bit I'm gonna go a little bit heavy-handed on this one. This is going to be one of the situations where I feel like it's going to seem like I'm taking a picture book a little too seriously. But if you ask me, this reads like a grand fantasy epic, which is not what I expected from this. The Luckiest Snowball. Okay, so it's a really simple concept. This kid makes a snowball, and the snowball says, wait, don't throw me because that'll kill me. And then so they hang out, and then and the snowball gets taken inside, but then he's melting, so he gets put in the freezer. And then he gets taken out once per season until he starts to melt, and so he gets to see spring, summer, fall, and then once it's winter again, he returns to his homeland. However, I would argue that he doesn't return to his homeland, he returns to his home world, because the way that this story is told feels to me like the freezer that he's kept in is essentially like, you know, like this some sort of crazy like sci-fi rocket ship, and he's, you know, this is purely me talking. It isn't actually explained as if it were a rocket ship in any way, but to me it has a vibe, and just the way that it does a really good job of talking about in a simple way, but talking about the drama of the seasons to something that's never seen them before and comes from a purely snow world and is in fact made of snow. Like, you know, like it's like the equivalent of like a human seeing a silicon-based life form for a snow-based life form to see spring and summer is the feeling to me. And so it's like these whole different alien worlds or alien dimensions. Maybe I'm reading way too much into this because that isn't explicitly said here, but I feel like it somehow communicated it. There's these really cute segments. They do more than they needed to in a way that I like with the freezer scenes. Here, I'll give you some examples. There's just some nice details, you know. Sometimes the details of what's happening while he's in the freezer are to illustrate like different things about the seasons. Like when it's fall, he's joined in the freezer by a bunch of Thanksgiving food. Every time the ice cubes leave, their tray comes back filled with water. Nice things to just these to me are details that are really helpful because they add a sense of life to the story. They're not overcomplicating it. Anyways. And then Larry's the name of Snowball, kind of ugly name, but whatever. Sorry, Larry. But he misses Izzy, and then Izzy is the kid. And Izzy comes at last. It's spring, says Izzy. Larry has never seen so many colors. Blue, green, red, orange, yellow, purple, and more. He feels so lucky to have seen spring until... Help, I'm melting. Okay, so that's pretty basic. But then he says, Larry is safe in the freezer where he tells all of his friends about spring. I think I remember spring, says the asparagus. I was just a seedling then. To me, there's something exciting about that kind of statement. So then there's all these popsicles because it's summer. Okay, it's summer, he says. He puts Larry in a blue box that's almost as cold as the freezer. Izzy covers the box and takes Larry for a long ride. Izzy opens the box and Larry is nearly blinded by the bright yellow sun. He's surrounded by sea, sand, seagulls, and creatures with shells. Larry feels so lucky to have seen summer until... I don't know, I'm really reading too much into this, aren't I? But to me, there was like... This is like an epic adventure story about somebody traveling simply by being put in a freezer and then taken out into the same place, but it's a whole new world. Like almost like you're traveling between worlds, but instead of you going between the worlds, you stay in one place and new worlds come to the land that you're on. Like the land that you're on is a blank slate and new worlds are traveling to it so that you get to see them. I'm reading too much into this, but that was how I started reading this story. I can't fully justify my reading of this, but and then in the back it tries to be educational and teach you about seasons. Somehow that book hit me as some sort of sci-fi epic. That's why I liked it. Okay, Chiri and Chira. If you watched my previous video from last week, I read the first Chiri and Chira book. I have 2 more this time. Once again, these books are just beautiful art that are playing into. These are by Kaya Doi, by the way. Did I say the author of this one? No, I didn't. This is The Luckiest Snowball by Elliot Kraloff. Okay, so yeah, Chiri and Chira books by Kaya Doi. This is Chiri and Chira in the Tall Grass, Chiri and Chira Underground. Translated from the Japanese by Yuki Kaneko, and this one's translated from the Japanese by David Boyd. So they are translated by different people. Once again, these are just gorgeous books that are seem tailored to like appealing to my particular weird interests. For example, in this one, especially, the girls drive into tall grass. So they're riding their bikes into the tall grass. And then the grass is somehow magically they're tiny once they come out of it. I kind of have this weird obsession with like borrowers and like the idea of like how cool the world would be, how cool the mundane world that's right outside your door would be if you were tiny. It would become this like crazy adventure world. That's a idea that really sparks a lot of excitement in me. So I like this. And on top of that, yes, thank God the series does continue the trend of it just being the girls popping from place to eat food to place to eat food, and then showcasing the weird fantasy foods that they encounter with large, gorgeous, dedicated, full-page drawings. Oh my God! I can't explain it other than that is my jam. And if it's your jam, you should get these books too. I want these books for myself. They make some colorful candies. I would love to see these Chiri and Chira books compiled into like a big book so that I could really appreciate the illustrations. And almost like I almost want an encyclopedia of like the world of Chiri Chira. I'll quickly show you the underground one too. It's not as fun for me. They just dig underground and meet a bunch of underground animals. But they find a bunch of moles peanut farming, and sure enough, there's some peanut soft serve for you. Oh my God, so cool. That's totally my thing. They have, look at these cute little vegetables. Oh my God, look at the little mole on the back. If you get it, then you get it from what I just said, so I don't need to say anymore. Okay, moving on. This one's called Pakun the Wolf and His Dinosaur Friends. This one, I barely really even wanted to read the story, so the story wasn't that important. I am crazy about the art. So this is written and illustrated by Yasuko Kimura. This was originally published in 1982. So I guess this is a reprint because Google said it was from like 2017 or something, but it must be a reprint. This is from 1982. That makes more sense. It does have extremely like 70s, 80s, 90s Japanese character design kind of sensibility, and that is why I love it so much, because that is one of my favorite design sensibilities. Artists like Fujiko Fujio and Fujio Akatsuka and like Sanrio stuff from the 80s, like Kuropi especially, like that's the vibe that I get from these. Kind of like Doraemon vibes a little bit. I should just show you. Okay, so there's a lot of fun details, like these animals that, like, kind of look like the animal. Like, look at this bug with the deer horns, and this turtle with, like, a very specific flower designs on it. Like, you can tell what animal it is, but there's a ton of creative liberties taken with the designs, and then they all have these kind of, it's the eye style that really pushes that, like, 80s, 90s Japanese vibe. Once again, I'm a sucker for these like cutaways of underground tunnels. And so then he tunnels out, this little wolf guy tunnels out into, I love his little like wiggly flat eyes too. He tunnels out into Dinosaur Land, and then we get these incredible things. Okay, number one, this amazing beetle. So one of the things I love about this is how detailed and textural the drawing is, even though the character design itself is really stylized and simplistic. The like painterliness of his eyelids and the and his wing cases, and actually the amount of detail in his like wings and his body, but like also with his really simplistic like strong graphic character design, that is something that's so exciting to me and something that I really want to emulate in my own art. This page might be my favorite. Look at that. Look at how cool they did these jellyfish with their little big goofy eyeballs, and that freaking nautilus with his eyes all close together and on one side of his body like that. That is just so exciting to me. And like the details of his tentacles too, like the contrast of detail and like graphic simplicity is so fun here. I really like this. He's talking to the T-Rex while the T-Rex is actively eating, like biting into this other guy. Then he encounters this thing, a Caraurus, and it's cool enough. But then look at this. Okay, so it says, "I'm scared, Pakun," says Terra, trembling. Grrr, says Pakun the wolf. Pakun the wolf bares his fangs at Caraurus and scares him away. Here's him baring his fangs. Okay, there's him normally. Here's him baring his fangs. Whoa! Like that kind of like daring, like dramatic, like it feels like animated character design in a book is so exciting to me. Like, you know, like he could have just been opening his mouth. This designer took the extra liberty to like push the idea of opening his mouth to an extreme, and like in doing so, you know, really just takes full advantage of the medium, that you can do whatever you want here. The movement can be dramatic, the movement can be metaphorical, the movement can be you know, ridiculous and nonsensical. So cool to me that you know, it's really just like beyond, just so much beyond the default, really like being playful and being and making it personal and taking a personal tact to it, and being original and really thinking about how to move beyond the obvious, and also just like being dramatic about it. Like always push it. That's what I want to do in my art. You know, I think that we don't need to be so realistic. We can throw caution and perspective to the wind, and illustrate concepts in dramatic pushing of the idea kind of ways. So yeah, I think that's all my favorite illustrations from the book. There's a cool page with all the dinosaurs in it. But that's enough for me. Are there some cool animals on here? Look at this bug. This bug is pretty cool. Or is it a bug? Like, I can't really tell. It's so cool, right? Incredibly inspiring to my personal projects. And so I definitely need this in my personal collection. The story itself, I don't have very much to say about. It's just a kid walking through a world of creatures, and it just feels made to showcase the illustrations. So from the internet, it seems like this is part of a series of Pakun books. I can't find any others, so I'm going to have to do some more research. I found a lot of other books by Yasuko Kima, but she's apparently written some other Pakun books, and I need to find them. So probably going to have to actually do some searches in Japanese, since English doesn't want to do that for me. This book is my top book for the day. It's House Held Up by Trees by Ted Kuser, illustrated by John Klassen. I could immediately tell it was illustrated by John Klassen. Most of his books are kind of characterized by their cute, simple, but kind of silly character design. This one is really serious, but I could still tell it was him just by the like line quality, or not line quality. Sorry, it doesn't have lines per se, but his painting style. Like it was obviously John Klassen to me, but there's no faces shown. There's no cute animal characters. It's a very somber, realistic kind of story, which starts with I admire this so much. The story starts with this sort of subtitle on the title page, and it really did a good job at creating an atmosphere for me. House held up by trees. Not far from here, I have seen a house held up by the hands of trees. This is its story. Everything from like the fact that line exists here at all to the phrase "not far from here," it really creates this awesome atmosphere to me, and it's an example of a type of book that I want to write. This is very, very much the type of book that I want to write, because I read a lot of books that don't particularly have a story, don't particularly have characters, don't particularly make me laugh, and as a result are boring or heavy-handed or not very good. And it always frustrates me, because I want to write a book like that, but that is good. You know what I mean? And I swear that there's books like it. Like Big Pets by Lane Smith. I feel like does that kind of just this like atmosphere. It's serious. It's not silly. It's not fun. But it really is moving and creates this sense of atmosphere, which is, I think that the proof that a sense of atmosphere is enough to make a book interesting without humor and story and plot and characters, is that that's the case in the real world. If you're just out in the world and you're exploring, there doesn't have to be a narrative to that. There doesn't have to be characters. There doesn't have to be humor. You can still be like, what's around the corner? This is beautiful. What's going on? That's the atmosphere that I want to create in the books that I write. And this book feels like a masterclass in it. There are human characters, but they're not protagonists. Their faces aren't shown, and they aren't named, and they are not the focus of the story, and that's very, very clear from the get-go. The focus of the story is the house, and the house is not personified. The house is not anthropomorphized. The house simply exists. The prose in this is perfect to me. That so often I feel like stories are either so simplistic that they're boring, or are stories that feel like they were simplistic and then the author like shoved poetry in there and it's like awkward and stilted or just feels heavy-handed or forced or try hard or just is bad poetry. This manages to be an extremely poetic book that says more than what more than no, actually that's not true. Every line in this feels like it is for a purpose. Every line of it feels like it's communicating a concept while also being flowery to some extent, but in a really solid way. I'll just read it to you and you'll see. Okay, this is the second page. I'm just starting on this. But in the lots on either side there were wild trees of all kinds, maple and elm and ash and hackberry and cottonwood, all noisy with wind and birdsong. When the wind blew toward the house in spring, the children who lived in it could smell the tiny, sweet green flowers on the trees. Beneath the trees were bushes so thickly woven together that you had to crawl on your hands and knees to get to the cool and shadowy secret places inside. There were 2 children, a boy and a girl, and they lived with their father. They loved to play among the trees. Sometimes they heard the footfalls of animals they couldn't quite see because of all the leaves. Sometimes they lay in the shadows and watched their father at work on his lawn. They could smell the tiny, sweet green flowers. There's a perfect level of description for me there. Beneath the trees and were bushes so thickly woven together. Woven together is a nice way to put that, but it also like moves on and gets to the point. It doesn't belabor the point. To crawl on your hands and knees to get to the cool and shadowy secret places inside. Like it's very colorful. It is poetic, but it all feels really purposeful. It demonstrates the atmosphere. It gets the atmosphere across and then moves on. I really admire the how they manage to balance succinctness and purposefulness with definitely really strong poetic atmosphere and flowery language. That's hard to do. So yeah, it's about a house that gets abandoned and what happens as the trees grow around the house and lift it off of its foundation. That sounds like a basic story, but it made me cry on the final page. So loved it. If you want an example of a children's book that manages to eschew characters and humor and action-filled plot for simple atmosphere and still pull that atmosphere off and have the perfect balance between poetry and movement in the story moving along. This is everything that I want to do and that I want in books. So that was great. Yeah. Okay. That's all of my videos for today. Man, every video I make, that's all my books for today. Every video I make gets longer and longer. I'll edit this a little bit actually and see what it turns out like. But for now, I'm just gonna say bye. And I'll see you next week. Okay. Thanks for watching.